All right, let's dive into one of the most violent, most transformative periods in all of human history. We're going to unpack how the 20th century became this absolute crucible of conflict, one that completely redrew the world map and honestly changed what it means to be human. So let's get into the forces that set an entire century on fire. So here's the big question we're really wrestling with today. How did a world of so-called progress, of new technology and new ideas, end up producing the most staggering destruction anyone had ever seen? And this isn't just a history lesson. It's really about understanding the deep currents that are still shaping our world, right now. You see, to get why everything exploded, you first have to look at the immense pressure that was building up just beneath the surface. The world at the turn of the 20th century, well, on the outside it might have looked kinda stable, but underneath it was absolutely riddled with deep, deep cracks. Okay, so what you're looking at here is this incredible dual crisis. On one side, you've got these ancient empires, the Ottomans, the Russians, the Qing dynasty, all basically rotting from the inside out. But on the other side, you have the so-called strong European powers, who were caught in a trap of their own making. Think of it with the acronym MAIN. You had militarism, a massive arms race. Alliances, these rigid pacts that meant if one country went to war, everybody got dragged in. Imperialism, a mad scramble for colonies. And finally, nationalism, this aggressive, my country is better than your country fever. It was a powder keg just waiting for a spark. And that spark finally ignited in the summer of 1914. People called it the Great War. It was so horrific, so devastating, that many honestly believed it had to be the war that would end all wars. Of course, we now know they were tragically, horribly wrong. What's just staggering when you look at this is the speed of it all. It's a total domino effect. One assassination, that's the spark, but that rigid alliance system, that was the fuse. Look how fast it goes. In just over a month, a local conflict in the Balkans yanks every major European power into a world war. Each step just locked in the next one. It was almost unstoppable. Everyone thought this war would be over by Christmas. That idea was completely obliterated by the brutal reality of new technology. This was not a war of heroic cavalry charges. It was a war of machine guns that literally mowed men down, of poison gas that choked them in the trenches, and U-boats that sank ships without any warning. Technology had turned the battlefield into an industrial slaughterhouse, creating a bloody stalemate that just ground on for 4 long years. And this is the result. 9 million soldiers dead. To put that into perspective, that's more than the entire population of some countries at the time. A whole generation of young men just gone, wiped out. It's a scale of death that the world had never, ever seen before. Now, you would think that after a horror like that, the peace would be constructed with extreme care. But it wasn't. The Treaty of Versailles was less about a lasting peace and more about punishment. By forcing Germany to accept all the blame and pay crippling reparations, the treaty didn't actually solve anything. It just planted the seeds of bitterness that would grow into an even deadlier war just 20 years later. So the time between the 2 world wars wasn't really an era of peace. It was more like a fragile, chaotic intermission. The world was broken, financially and politically, and that created this giant vacuum, which was quickly filled by radical, extreme new ways of thinking. And the knockout blow to this already fragile world? The Great Depression. I mean, it was a perfect storm. Countries were already drowning in war debt. Then you have crop prices collapsing, bankrupting farmers. And to top it all off, nations threw up huge trade barriers, thinking they were protecting themselves, but they ended up just choking the entire global economy. It was a vicious cycle that left millions of people desperate. And this slide really shows the great ideological battle that came out of that desperation. On one side, you have democracies like the US trying to fix things with government spending, things like the New Deal. On the other, you have the Soviet Union's extreme model, total state control, forcing industrialization, and brutally seizing all private farms for the state. It was an approach that came at an absolutely staggering human cost. And into this chaos steps a third and much more sinister ideology: fascism. For people who had lost absolutely everything, it was a seductive offer. It promised to restore order. It gave them someone to blame for all their problems. And it promised to bring back national glory through absolute dictatorial military power. It took hold in Italy and, most terrifyingly, in Germany. So, with the rise of these aggressive expansionist governments, fueled by all that resentment and radical ideology, a Second World War started to feel, well, almost inevitable. All those unresolved problems from the First War were about to explode all over again, but this time with even more devastating power. The thing is, Hitler wasn't exactly subtle about his plans. As this timeline shows, he just followed this clear, step-by-step path of aggression. He kept testing the world, and each time the Allied powers chose appeasement, basically giving him what he wanted, hoping he'd stop, it just made him bolder. That Munich Agreement, it wasn't peace. It was a green light to keep going, which led directly to the invasion of Poland. But this war was about so much more than just conquering land. At its very dark heart was a monstrous ideology. The final solution was the horrifyingly bureaucratic name the Nazis gave to their systematic industrial-scale plan to murder every single Jewish person in Europe. It was the ultimate nightmarish goal of their entire worldview. 6 million. It's a number that's so big, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. 6 million people. 6 million lives, families, communities, just wiped out. And it wasn't a chaotic byproduct of war. It was a calculated industrial system of pure hatred. That's a crucial thing to understand. So the war that started with cavalry charges and biplanes ended with the atom bomb. The destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 did bring World War II to a close, but it also unleashed a brand new kind of terror on the world, the constant background fear of nuclear annihilation. And just look at that number. Look at the shocking escalation. 9 million soldiers dead in World War I. Now, 75 million people total, soldiers and civilians. The scale of the catastrophe is it's almost unthinkable. This was truly total war. So, from the ashes of this unbelievable global disaster, the world made a solemn promise: never again. But as we look back at the decades that came after, you have to ask yourself, was that promise actually kept? And first, it's so important to remember that the Holocaust wasn't actually the first genocide of the 20th century. During World War I, the Ottoman Empire systematically murdered up to 1.5 million Armenians, a horror that happened while the rest of the world was looking the other way. The Holocaust, with its cold, industrial efficiency, became the ultimate symbol of what humanity is capable of at its worst. And it was this event, specifically, that led to that global pledge to prevent the crime of genocide from ever happening again. And yet, despite that promise, the vow was broken over and over again. The world stood by and watched as horrors unfolded. In Bosnia in the 90s, in Rwanda in 1994, in Darfur in the 2000s. The vow of never again has tragically and repeatedly become again and again. And that leaves us with this one final, really unsettling question. We might be done with the 20th century on the calendar, but have we actually escaped its patterns of nationalism, of ideological hatred and mass violence? Or are we, in some way, all still living in its long, dark shadow? Thanks for watching.